Welcome friends to another r/maliciouscompliance video. If you could take 2 seconds and hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, it really helps support the channel. That said, our first story is by Can I Please Be a Cat? Take you to court? Why I didn't know you felt that way. This chain of events started almost 20 years ago and involves myself and a notoriously snooty national real estate agency. There's a bit of a background leading to the malicious compliance incident, so please bear with me. This all occurred in Queensland, Australia. I once rented a property through an agency from 2004 to 2006. Due to my ex-partner's explosive and violent temper, we'd been handed an eviction notice. There was damage to the property that was unfixed at the time we were evicted. Damage that was in the form of fist and hammer-sized holes in the walls, etc. We obviously did not receive any of the bond deposit back, as the repair costs more than absorbed the amount. There was also an added sum of about $1,700 extra to cover the rest of the costs incurred repairing the damage. This amount was forwarded to a debt collection agency. The collection amount was in both of our names as we'd jointly been on the lease agreement. I wasn't upset at the agency, they were just doing their job by being a good advocate for the owner of the property at this stage. Taking the bond and charging us for the repair was standard and not nasty, vindictive, or overkill in the slightest. My anger came later. Although I must admit I was a bit miffed to be dually held financially responsible for the damage caused by my ex, but due to the nature of the joint lease, not much could be legally done. I was just grateful we had parted ways not long after. A few years post-eviction, I wanted to get my life more organized in many areas and tie up any loose ends that would impede me moving forward. A clean slate, so to speak. So the debt issue came first. After many phone calls and some paperwork exchange, plus an escalation or two, the debt collection agency finally agreed to split the $1,700 damages bill between the ex and myself. Now I could pay off half and not be held accountable for his portion any longer. This had to be done without his consent as he refused. I'm unsure as to why, possibly hoping I would pay the whole lot to rebuild my credit rating, or most likely just to be annoying. Once I had paid off my portion of the collector's debt, I thought I was done with the whole business and the black mark against my name. Not so, unfortunately. It turned out that the state I lived in had a blacklist that real estate agencies and leasers could add tenants' names to. It's called the TICA list. All they needed was proof that the tenant had behaved in a bad enough manner regarding renting of a property to warrant being listed. Due to the fact that we'd been evicted, the damage, and also owed arrears to a debt agency for repairs, we unfortunately qualified. Being on this list made it almost impossible to rent, especially via a real estate agency. After speaking extensively with the RTA, which is a government agency, I found I was definitely eligible to have my name removed from the list, so I started taking action for this to happen. I was able to demonstrate good faith by having paid for half of the damages. It also went in my favor that my partner was abusive and there was legal evidence of this fact. However, I was told the only way to have my name removed was by the real estate agency, so I approached them and asked for them to do so. They were very helpful initially. If I was able to show them proof that the debt was settled, they were happy to remove my name. At least 7 years had elapsed by this point, so it was considered punishment enough. At the time, after 5 years, your name is usually removed from the TICA list. However, this company apparently kept tabs on who they had added to the list, and when the person's 5 years expired, they just added them again. Dirty tactics indeed. Obviously, I had been re-added. So I provided relevant documents to the agency and was assured my name would be removed as soon as they located my file. This apparently had been stored away in archives as much time had passed since I rented with them. I was told this would take a week maximum. All good. So I called a week later and was told to wait another week, still in a kind, helpful, and cordial tone. I called again after that time and was told to wait, you guessed it, another week, and this time I detected a tone of frost in the reply. So I called back more than a week later just to show patience, and now was spoken to in a very haughty manner. I was informed that my request was bothersome, being so because what I asked was not important and finding my file was a waste of their staff time. They would call me when they got around to it. I expressed how important it was personally and then heard the magic words, almost verbatim, "If you want us to do this so badly, we will only be forced to help you if ordered. Perhaps you should take us to court if you can't be patient. Goodbye. String me along? Okay, game on." I had a feeling this was all done to avoid removing my name as they had found my file. Also that they were stalling and wanted me to stay blacklisted, but I wasn't backing down without a fight, and so I took their advice. I filed against them to have the matter seen in a small claims court. It cost me $35, which would be reimbursed by the agency if I won. I didn't have anything to lose, and I wanted them to know that not all people will hold indefinitely or continue to be unjustly punished for longer than fair. It was listed to appear in about 4 days from filing. As soon as they received the court date paperwork, I was suddenly bombarded with phone calls. How dare I take the agency to court when they were working their hardest to find my file and help me? Doing my best to sound apologetic for taking their advice, I thanked them for the suggestion, as it seemed there would now be a time frame at least for the matter to be dealt with. On the day of the court, I had 3 sheets of paper as my sole evidence. A statement showing the repair bill had been paid and there were no finances outstanding, a statement from the RTA that I was eligible to have my name taken off the TICA list, and lastly, a document stating it was at the behest of the real estate agency to remove my name and that they had no good reason not to. Not 1, but 2 agents for the company showed up to court. When it came before the judge, both parties had to give evidence if relevant. I handed in my 3 pages, seeing them pass the judge a thick folder of paperwork, including photos of the property damage, was rather amusing considering they supposedly couldn't find my file when last requested. The judge asked them for a statement. They went on for a few minutes about why I didn't deserve to be removed, and justified their stance with the photos and prior rental history with them. All I had to reply was that I paid for my share of the damage, that the damage was due to my abusive ex, and that I had made restitution as much as I could regarding the matter, with no money owing. The judge then asked why I had brought it to court. I explained that the company was dragging their feet removing my name when it was a simple matter, and it wasn't necessarily fair to do so. That I had called them repeatedly and waited while they found my so hard to locate paperwork that had somehow miraculously appeared when convenient. That being on the TICA list was harmful to my future chances at renting, and also that my name had been resubmitted after dropping off the list. The judge queried them as to why they added my name again. They stated it was company policy. The judge expressed agreement with my stance. I had been punished enough, had made financial restitution, and now that my file had been located, I was not to be blacklisted anymore. Case decided in my favor. Win! The real estate agency was given 48 hours to submit proof to the court and a copy to myself that I was now off the list. Also, they had to pay for the $35 I spent taking them to court. The pair of agents walked out in a huff and were on the phone out in the hallway immediately after vacating the courtroom. I floated past them as I was on a justice high. As I got to the lifts, I thanked them for coming in and their sound advice and recommending court. Also that I was grateful for the bottle of wine they would be buying me with the $35 I was to be paid back. The look on their faces was priceless. If you were being intentionally blackballed by a company and being forced to stay on a list that makes you look bad as far as finding housing in places, would you take them to court? Or would you rather do something like calling them every day or a different alternate form of getting through to them? Let me know in the comments down below. Our next story is by Birdie Bazzard. You're going to call the police on me for doing my job? Okay, carry on. I work for a water company carrying out repairs on burst water mains on an on-call basis of 1 week every 2 months. This particular job happened about 8 years ago. We get a call out that a major pipe feeding a large housing estate had burst and needed repairs ASAP. We head out to the yard about 11 p.m. at night to collect our gear and get the plans and drawings of other utilities in the area of the work. We arrive on site, set up the traffic management as per regulations, speak with the inspector that called us out for an exact location of repair, too much water to mark in the usual way. We set up our barriers and work lights around the work area. We get out our still saw and cut a couple of meters of tar out, ready to start breaking the tar out of the road. Just as I started the jackhammer going, Mr. Sleepyhead comes stomping down the street in his slippers and dressing gown, looking rather perplexed. Took off my ear protection to see what he wanted. I could tell it wasn't to offer us a coffee. He then proceeded to tell me, "You can shut that freaking thing off and freak off until it's daytime." I explained that it was emergency work and that we couldn't have 600 properties get up and have no water in the morning, so it has to be completed now. And our work was fully understood by the council and the police. We then get the usual bollocks of, "Do you know who I am?" I refrain from telling him that I knew exactly who he is. He's an irritating butt wipe who was stopping us from working. He then starts turning the air supply off so I can't use the jackhammer, which was ever so slightly annoying. He then stated that he knew the police chief inspector and would have me arrested if I carried on. I said that I have to carry on as per my emergency work order, and if he carried on obstructing us, I'd have to call the police to get the job finished. Needless to say, he did it again and said, "Call who you like, I'll have you arrested and sacked by the morning." By now, I was tired, cold, and wet, and starting to get slightly irritated by his actions, so cue malicious compliance. I go back to the van and ring the police to explain that we're out carrying out emergency work and we're being prevented by completing it by one of the local residents, and explain what he's doing to stop us working. He stomps off in his now soggy slippers and I poured a coffee. About 40 minutes later, headlights appear in the distance, so I thought, great, just what we need so we can get done and recharged by 6 a.m. Hopefully. Mr. Sergeant and Mr. Constable arrive and come for a chat to find out what the freak is going on, and his words, "Why the freak are we doing it after midnight in the first place?" So I proceeded to explain that the water main had burst and we needed to get the supply restored by 6 a.m. to save between 1,500 to 2,000, only a slight exaggeration, people having no water in the morning when they get up. He then realized the job needed to be done and toddles off for a word with Mr. Sleepyhead. Before long, we can hear shouting from down the street. It then goes quiet and he comes back down to us to explain that the guy was a sandwich short of a picnic, a British euphemism for a nut job, and that they're going to have to hang around in case Mr. Sleepyhead started playing stupid games. So we fire up the compressor and start jackhammering again with my back towards the police car to save anything pinging off in that direction. A few minutes later, the machine driver toots his horn to get my attention. Mr. Sleepyhead had only come down the road carrying a piece of timber, lumber for you American folks, and was in the process of getting arrested for disturbing the peace. I honestly laughed so hard I nearly peed myself. Who the freak is that stupid when the police are around? Just in case anyone's interested, we were back on by 5:30 a.m. and had a coffee off Mr. Sleepyhead's neighbor, who was highly amused because he'd seen the whole incident out of his window. His only disappointment was his surveillance cameras didn't pick up the video and he only had the audio to share with his mates. I just love from start to finish how OP had every right to be there doing that work. And this guy comes up and starts harassing them saying, "Call the police then if you think I'm harassing you." It's like, okay, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And our final story of the day is by New Bromance. The time, read your contract, backfired regarding holiday pay. Back in 2015, I worked for a pretty dismal call center. It was an outsourced center that handled customer support for a lot of UK retailers. Staff turnover was real high, with the vast majority being on temporary contracts, and the promise of a permanent contract being hung over people's heads to make them suck up being treated like crap. After working there for nearly 2 years, in late February of that year, I was offered a permanent contract because they wanted to put me on their team leader program. The pay was slightly better, the job security was better. The only major difference was how holidays were handled. People on temporary contracts were paid for any unused holidays at the end of the working year in April. People on permanent contracts had to use their holidays or they would lose them. I had just over 3 weeks holidays saved up, so the day I accepted, I booked 3 weeks off in March so I wouldn't lose them in April. March rolled around and my manager told me that my holidays had been refused. I said that's fine as long as you pay me for them, and he replied that no, if you don't use your holidays, you lose them. I said that I was trying to use my holidays and they were not letting me. He shrugged and said it's the duty of the employee to manage their holiday time wisely and I should read my contract, despite the fact that I'd only gotten that contract 3 weeks earlier and the holidays worked differently. Understandably annoyed, that evening I went home and read my contract from beginning to end and discovered my manager had overlooked one crucial part of the paperwork. The contract clearly stated I had to give a week's notice and that any holidays not used would be paid to any leaving employee in full on their last paycheck. The next day, I came into work and announced I would be quitting unless paid my holidays or allowed to take the time off. And if they accepted my notice, then to be sure my holiday days were included in my final paycheck. My boss asked me if I was really going to quit over this, and I replied, was he really going to lose one of his most reliable employees over this? He wouldn't budge. I assumed he thought I was bluffing. So I handed in my notice, and on my leaving interview with my manager's manager, made sure to explain exactly why I was leaving. And yes, my final paycheck did include my unused holiday days. The end. The fact of the matter is, like OP said, it was a dismal call center. This isn't some prestigious manager job somewhere where you're going to want to stay and maybe forgo those holiday days. You got a slight raise at a call center. From everything I've ever heard about call center jobs, that's one of the most ditch-worthy professions I've ever heard of. You might be good at it, but I'm sure you can find some kind of comparable employment somewhere else. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So of all these stories I've read today, which is your favorite and why? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you haven't yet, if you could like and subscribe, that would mean a lot to me. Whatever you do, whether it's liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, all of it helps grow this channel and I appreciate the heck out of it. So until next time, I'll see you all tomorrow with some more stories.